Dicen que en la plaza en estos días se les ha visto cabalgar a Camilo y a Martí. Y delante de la caravana, lentamente sin jinete, un caballo para ti.
Vuelven las heridas que nos sanan de los hombres y mujeres que no te dejaremos ir. Hoy el corazón nos late afuera y tu pueblo, aunque le duela, no te quiere despedir.
Hombre, los agradecidos te acompañan. ¿Cómo anhelaremos tus hazañas? Ni la muerte cree que se apoderó de ti. Hombre, aprendimos a saberte eterno, así como lo vi Jesucristo. No hay un solo altar sin una luz por ti.
Hoy no quiero decirte comandante, ni barbudo ni gigante, todo lo que sé de ti. Hoy quiero gritarte, Padre mío, no te sueltes de mi mano, aún no sé andar bien sin ti.
Hombre, los agradecidos te acompañan. ¿Cómo anhelaremos tus hazañas? Ni la muerte cree que se apoderó de ti. Hombre, aprendimos a saberte eterno, así como lo vi Jesucristo. No hay un solo altar sin una luz por ti. Hombre, los agradecidos te acompañan. ¿Cómo anhelaremos tus hazañas? Ni la muerte cree que se apoderó de ti. Hombre, aprendimos a saberte eterno, así como lo vi Jesucristo. No hay un solo altar sin una luz por ti.
Dicen que en la plaza esta mañana ya no caben más corceles llegando de otro confín.
Greetings, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Good morning, Hope. Comrade Hope. Good morning, everybody watching the stream. Very, very happy to be here with y'all today. My name is Onyesanu. This is my comrade Monica, and we are both members of the New Mexico chapter of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. The All African People's Revolutionary Party is a revolutionary Pan-African socialist party founded in Africa by Kwame Nkrumah, first democratic president of the first country to gain independence from colonialism, Ghana. And after Ghana gained independence, good morning, Mac. After Ghana gained independence, Kwame Nkrumah said the independence of Ghana is meaningless without the total liberation of Africa, because he understood that one small independent country completely surrounded by colonized countries and imperialism could not hope to survive. And so he called for one unified socialist Africa, and he called for the formation of the All African People's Revolutionary Party to build towards that objective all around the world. So that's who we are. This is Weekly Pan-African News. We do this show every single Thursday at 12 p.m. Mountain Time. We started it at the very beginning of the very first lockdown, way back in March of 2020. So it's going to be almost a year that we've been doing this. But we decided that we could no longer have in-person events in person, but we still wanted to, connect with our community and spread political education and build with y'all. And so the weekly show is one of the many ways that we came up with to continue to connect with y'all. Good morning, Carrie. So, as I said, my name is Onyesanu. This is Weekly Pan-African News. This is my comrade, Monica. We are All African People's Revolutionary Party, New Mexico. And at the beginning of every show, we always do two things. The first thing that we do is call in an ancestor. And the reason why we do that is because we understand as African revolutionaries that we are part of a continuum of struggle for liberation that has gone on for over 5 centuries. The only reason that Monique and I are here speaking to you is because of the struggle and sacrifice and brilliance of our ancestors. The only reason any African person is still here, given all that we went through from slavery and colonization, is because of the sacrifices and struggles of our ancestors to be free. And so you'll be remiss if we did not acknowledge their contributions, if we did not lift them up, if we did not continue to learn from them, and also tell the truth about them, because revolutionary African ancestors are lied on in this society, just like every revolutionary person is lied on in this society. So yeah, so we always call in an ancestor, and the ancestor we want to call in today is C.L.R. James. C.L.R. James. The anniversary of his passing was actually this past week. He passed on January 4th, 1901. If you don't know who C.L.R. James is, he is someone who is foundational to the ideology and history of Pan-Africanism. He was a historian. He was a scholar. His most famous historical work is The Black Jacobins, and The Black Jacobins is the story of the Haitian Revolution. It was one of the first deep historical analysis from an African perspective of that revolution. So that was written by C.L.R. James. But he also wrote many, many, many books. He was a prolific writer, and he was also an active socialist, an active organizer. He was involved in many, many different Pan-African and socialist and communist political organizations in his time. He rubbed shoulders with some of the most influential members of the Pan-African movement, people like George Padmore, people like Kwame Nkrumah. C.L.R. James was a soldier as well as a teacher. And one of the books that had the biggest impact on me that he wrote is a book called A History of Pan-African Revolt. And the reason why it was so influential is because in the history of Pan-African Revolt, C.L.R. James starts the story of the African liberation struggle at the moment when Europeans set foot on the African continent. He doesn't pick it up in the 20th century. He doesn't pick it up with slavery. He picks it up at the very, very beginning of colonialism, and then he traces the entire history for hundreds of years, all the way through to like the Pan-African Congresses in the 20th century, to say this is how African people have been fighting. We have been continuously resisting. We have been strategic. We have been bold. We have been brilliant. We have had extreme successes. And he like uncovers all of this history that is deliberately hidden, by the empire, by white supremacy, by capitalism, in a way that was extremely influential for me. Once I read that book, I was like, it's gotta be Pan-Africanism. It has to be. It has to be. It always has been. So I definitely recommend that folks check out A History of Pan-African Revolt. Also check out The Black Jacobins if you want to get an African perspective of the Haitian Revolution. And salute to C.L.R. James for all of the knowledge that he put into the world and all of the influence that he had upon our liberation struggle. Definitely one of the strongest revolutionary Pan-Africanists that has ever lived. So salute to C.L.R. James. And then the other thing that we always do is we want to acknowledge that we are on stolen land. We are on occupied Tiwa Nation land, also known as Albuquerque, but the entire Western Hemisphere is stolen indigenous land. There were thousands of indigenous nations just chilling, thriving, peacefully trading with each other, just like taking care of the land and the water and being fine until Europeans came here and straight up stole it and then attempted to completely wipe them off the face of the planet. So this is Tiwa land. It will always be Tiwa land. The Tiwa people are actually still here. We work with them and they're fighting to get their land back. So just as we are fighting to unify Africa, to reclaim our land in Africa from European colonizers, from capitalism, and from imperialism, indigenous nations, including the Tiwa Nation, but all the indigenous nations of the Western Hemisphere are fighting to get their land back as well. And we will always, always, always move in solidarity with them. because it doesn't matter how long ago you stole something. It will always remain stolen until you give it back to the person who it actually belongs to. So this is stolen land. It always will be. And the indigenous nations and African people and Palestinians and all colonized and oppressed peoples around the world are gonna get our land back. It's just gonna happen. So that's it. Land acknowledgement. So every single show, we always do a political education topic. That's like the core of what the APRP does. We are a propaganda party. We are interested in raising the consciousness of our people and of analyzing history from a revolutionary, Pan-African, and socialist perspective, because this capitalist, white supremacist media just keep people really confused. Like, they just truly don't. Every time there's like a discourse or like a collective conversation, you're just like, oof, like it's just very confused. And it's not people's fault. It's because of capitalism. It's because of white supremacy. It's because of imperialism. And so our intent with the political education portion of this show is to inject some correct revolutionary, Pan-African, and socialist analysis into the situation. And so the topic that we're going to cover for PE this week is this COVID-19 vaccine. These COVID-19 vaccines that have recently hit the market, that are now being distributed throughout the United States and Europe. We're going to talk about how they were made. We're going to talk about how they're being distributed. We're going to talk about the extreme inequality baked into capitalism and imperialism that is botching the distribution of this vaccine. It's going to be great. But before we jump into that conversation, we want to make two things clear. First thing is that we are going to give you facts and analysis about these vaccines, about how they work, about how they were developed, and about, you know, the political implications of how they're being distributed. But what we're not going to do is tell you to take it or not to take it. We are not going to do that. It is your choice. We're going to explain how they work. We're going to give you the truth, but we are not going to impose our beliefs about what you should do when it comes to taking this vaccine. We're just not going to do that. It's beyond the scope of this show. The second thing that I want to open with is that African people and indigenous people, and in fact, most colonized populations in the United States, have a extremely justified skepticism of the Western healthcare system. And the reason for that is not because we are anti-science, not because we are anti-vaccine, not because we are primitive and uncivilized people, which is how people talk to us about it, but because there is an extensive history of trauma and violence being inflicted upon us by the Western healthcare system in the United States and in Europe. Like, European and US science has tested on African people against our will, without our consent, sometimes not even telling us, for centuries. Like the entire, what's it called, gynecology as like a practice. All of the things they do during a pap smear were tested on African women without anesthesia and barbaric tools. And that's just like one example of how monstrous the relationship of Western medicine is to African and colonized people. And so when these vaccines were produced, you saw a lot of African people being like, no, thank you. No, thank you. And then in response, you saw a lot of non-African people scold them, talk down to them, patronize them, act like they were stupid. These are African people who are looking at this extremely long history of Western medicine, traumatizing us, experimenting on us, harming us. Even without the experimentation and the harm, even when I go to the doctor, for example, or an African woman goes to the doctor and she's pregnant, we get a lesser standard of care than everybody else that leads directly to worse outcomes. And so we are speaking from experience when we are expressing the skepticism, but despite the fact that there's like real shit that happened that makes us feel this way, I have seen so many like racist as hell conversations directed at African people who are skeptical about this vaccine. And it's very frustrating. It's very frustrating because it's racist, but also it's happening in almost like a vacuum that does not acknowledge this continuous trauma inflicted upon African people by Western medicine. So I just wanted to open with that to say, if you're an African person watching this and you are skeptical, I hope that we can answer some of your questions and address some of your concerns. And also, you are right to be skeptical. Don't let these people talk down to you. Don't do it. If you're indigenous, don't let people talk down to you. Like this, we have the reason, all the reason in the world to not trust these people, to not trust these doctors, to not trust this science that for like hundreds of years was saying we were like physically inferior. Like, we have so much reason not to want to deal with this. So I just want to validate y'all and empathize with y'all and let the people who have engaged in this racist ass behavior, talking down to African people who are skeptical, know that you are wrong and you are confused and you are acting racist. I just want to say that. Did you want to add anything, Monica? Cool. Alrighty. Yeah, I've just been watching the conversations unfold and been very, 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 very frustrated. Like, very frustrated. I'm like, how are you talking to us like this when all of this history and also present exists? Like, why? Why? But anyway, so that's the context that we want to open with, those two things. We're not going to tell you to take it or not take it. We're just going to give you information. And also, African and colonized people have every reason to be skeptical of the Western healthcare system and of these vaccines. They have every reason. Every reason. It's completely justified. So, that's out of the way. So let's get into the meat of this conversation. First and foremost, let's talk about how the vaccines that exist and are being distributed were developed and how they work. Because although, like I said, the skepticism of African people is justified, is rational, there is at the same time a lot of misinformation about these vaccines flying around. And it's not because people are stupid, it's because of capitalism and how people do not get access to the knowledge they need to make informed decisions. They are constantly being exposed to misinformation from the very top. They are constantly being exposed for misinformation on the internet. And so people don't really know where to go to get correct facts. And so because of that, confusion is proliferating about how these vaccines work. Like, for example, they are a new kind of vaccine known as an mRNA vaccine or a messenger RNA vaccine. And as soon as folks saw mRNA, they were like, what the fuck are you doing with my DNA? Like, they were very, very skeptical, right? And so a thing that's like flying around the internet in terms of like the beliefs about what these vaccines are doing is that they are injecting people with these to change their DNA. That's one of the things I've seen often. But that's not actually what they're doing. They don't have the capacity to do that. They are a new form of vaccine, yes, but all that it really means when we say messenger RNA vaccine is that they are taking a small portion of the COVID-19 virus that cannot make you sick. It's just like a little part of its DNA, so it can't make you sick, but it's like a little piece of COVID-19. They add it to a carrier, they inject it into your body. Your body detects the little piece of COVID-19, which again is not enough of it to make you sick. It's like it does not contain the virus. It just contains information about the virus. So they inject it into your body. Your body's like, what the hell is that? Your body produces proteins to begin to fight what it suspects is like a foreign invasion. And then those proteins produce an immune response that help you fight off the virus and prevent you from getting it. So mRNA, messenger RNA, is not a kind of DNA that can change anything about your DNA. All it is, it's like kind of like a read-only disc. If you want to use like a nerdy term, it can't write, it can only read. So like all it's doing is like helping your body produce antibodies and proteins that can fight off a viral infection. So it's actually like, in terms of the science, it's like pretty straightforward and pretty safe. It is though pretty new technology because historically vaccines have been like inert viruses that they like give you to develop an immune response. And so the actual virus is contained in the vaccine, but the COVID-19 vaccines, and this is true of like the majority of the vaccines that have been produced thus far, the COVID-19 vaccine is different. They use this mRNA to inject you like with a little piece of COVID that can't get you sick to produce this COVID, this immune response. So again, the COVID-19 vaccines are messenger RNA vaccines, but they cannot change your DNA. All they are doing is helping your body produce an immune response that'll fight off a viral infection. That's it. That's it. Other things to know about the COVID vaccine is that the only reason that the Pfizer vaccine, the Moderna vaccine, the AstraZeneca vaccine, any of these vaccines exist is because back in January, when China discovered the first cases within those countries, and those they turned out to not to be the first cases in the world, because later on, it turned out like Europe and US had like cases in the fall. So those are not the first cases in the world, but those are the first cases that China discovered within its borders. And so after China discovered the first COVID infections within its borders, they, organized a rapid response, lockdown, et cetera, but they also studied COVID-19. They sequenced its DNA, and then they released that DNA sequence for free to the whole world. And so all of the mRNA vaccines that exist were produced using that DNA sequence that China made freely available. So China is directly responsible for all of the vaccines that are currently available. China did that for free, for free. All the shit that China has gotten from the beginning of this pandemic is so ludicrous because they literally made it pop first. They had like an extremely organized and effective response that stopped the spread of that virus within months. And then they figured out, working with places like Cuba, how to treat it effectively. And then they were like, here is some information you can use to produce a vaccine. And then what do the US and Europe do? They just like shit. They've been shitting on China for like a year. Like just like continuously blaming China. US is like, it's the China virus. People are making racist jokes about what Chinese people eat. People are accusing China of releasing it intentionally. I'm just like, damn. Like y'all took the freely available information that China provided to produce these vaccines that were then privately owned and sold for profit. And you don't even have like the good sense or like the grace to be like, thanks. You're just like, we're going to take this and also fuck you. And also we're racist. It's really wild. It's really wild.
It is. In China, and we're making millions and billions of dollars.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Sounds like the U.S. empire. That's the new here.
It's very on brand. Very on brand for US and Europe. So yeah, all the vaccines that currently exist were made possible because China released that DNA sequence for free back in January. In January, China did that. So Pfizer and Moderna should be like, thank you, China. But instead, Pfizer and Moderna are about to count their stacks. Anyway, so that's a little bit how the vaccine works, a little bit about how the vaccine is produced, and then two other things that we want to touch on about the vaccine, specifically how they work, is that you can get the vaccine, but it's important to understand that even after you've gotten both doses of these vaccines, you will still have to wear a mask. You will still have to social distance. We are still going to have to be doing this like half-ass lockdown. And the reason for that is that the vaccine does not actually give people what is known as sterilizing immunity. Sterilizing immunity means you 100% cannot get COVID and you cannot spread it. The vaccines, the ones that are currently being distributed, so the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, and now the AstraZeneca vaccine, they drastically reduce your chance of getting COVID. True. And if you do get COVID, they tend to make it much more mild if you are vaccinated. But you can still catch it. And importantly, you can still give it to people. You can still give it to people. So if you have gotten both doses of that vaccine, you have to understand that you still have to be extremely careful because you are still able to catch COVID, including asymptomatic cases of COVID, and then spread that to unvaccinated people. The problem with this, though, that we're going to get into in more detail, is that people who are being vaccinated and the people who are pushing this vaccine as like the solution are not telling this to people. The common understanding of vaccines is that you take it and you're good. You can't catch it, you can't spread it, you're fine. That's not how these work. In reality, in order for these vaccines to effectively control the spread of COVID-19, 90% of the US population must be vaccinated. 90%. Right now we are at 2%. And again, people are not like the CDC, the people in leadership, Democrats, Republicans, people are not telling folks that they can actually still contract and spread COVID-19. And so they still have to mask up. They still have to social distance. They still have to do the half-ass lockdown. People are not being told this. Instead, they're getting the vaccine with no other information and then thinking they're fine. And that, if you look at the math, if you look at 2% of the population currently vaccinated after 3-4 months, if you look at people not getting correct information about how they can still spread it if they're vaccinated, and if you look at how we're going to get into, the US does not have the infrastructure to vaccinate enough people within a shorter time frame than years, then you're looking at a very serious situation that is going to sneak up on people because, again, the folks in power, public health officials, and even these companies are not telling folks this information. That, again, the vaccine will help you if you catch COVID and you're vaccinated, it'll be a much, much milder case of COVID. But you could still give it to people. They're not telling people that. And that's a problem. So with that, I'm going to pass it to Monica to talk about more of the contradictions about how this vaccine is being distributed.
I just wanted to add to that. Also with the vaccination, know how long it's going to work. So while you have the vaccine, they don't know how long you're immune for. Because technically, you can still get coronavirus, as Anya talked about. You might have milder symptoms, but they're not sure the duration of how long the vaccine will actually be working. So that's also something to add.
I just want to, and then on top of that, so like there's people who believe if you catch COVID, you can't catch it again. It's not true. Not true. It's not true that you can't catch it if you're vaccinated. You have a lower chance, but you can still catch it. And also, even if you have COVID before, it does not mean you're immune. You can still catch it. You can still get really sick, and you can still, like, I've been swiping on Tinder, and there's all these like sketchy dudes that are like, I've had COVID, I'm immune, because they want to get laid. And it's so gross because it's not true. Anyway, back to you.
No, that's important because I've been hearing that too from people that they have antibodies to fight it off for so many days or so many months, but none of the research is showing that at all. So thank you for bringing that up. So what's been happening now is, as Onisa Wu talked about, is China released the DNA for free. And what happened with that is there are these pharmaceutical companies that went into impoverished companies to have people participate in this research study. So, for example, Pfizer was connected to South Africa, Argentina, Brazil, Turkey, and Germany. And over 44,000 volunteers participated in the research study. And in the trials, what they were able to do is find a 90% effect rate around the vaccine that was developed. And the CEO, Albert, I think, Rua, what he did is he did an open letter and a thank you, giving deep gratitude to all the volunteers who participated in the study. And he said, "You are the true heroes, and the whole world owes you tremendous debt and gratitude, because the vaccine, it can save lives. You know, in this country, it would have to be 90% people having the vaccine, and it would save lives. This vaccine will save lives." And what this capitalistic society did was the U.S. Empire, they bought up all the patents to this vaccine. So what that means is the people who participated in those in the study, they have limited or no access to the vaccine. So South Africa, Argentina, Brazil, and Turkey, because they are impoverished countries, do not have the money to purchase these vaccinations, these vaccines to give to their people. So what this country did was they purchased 100 doses for $1.9 billion in the summer. That's the Pfizer one. And then they also, in December, just purchased, the Department of Health Human Services announced they're going to be purchasing 100 million more. And because the U.S. owns the patent, they can buy up to 400 million doses. And even though they have all this this vaccine, what we've seen is only 3 million people have been vaccinated. So only 2% of the population so far has been vaccinated. Everything that they bought up can only last for 30 days. So 30 days. So other countries who don't have medical infrastructure, who are desperate for medicine, are so often exploited. This is medical exploitation that consistently happens in impoverished countries. The medical community consistently does this, especially pharmaceutical countries, because of the need for medicine. However, they're not going to be able to access it. On top of that, the U.S. empire also has 4 other companies right now as we speak, in making the vaccine as well. They're in early stages of development in making that making the vaccine. This country has also bought over 200 million doses from Moderna. All these doses of the vaccine, and only 2% of the population has had access to it because there's no infrastructure, there's no plan on how to provide the vaccine to people. And so the plan is just to hoard it and just like let it die, like, because you're not going to be able to use it once it expires. So Pfizer is going to be making $975 million off the vaccination. And the Moderna company, by the end of 2021, is going to be making $10 billion. And people who participated in these studies will have no access to the vaccine. And because it's a global pandemic, people will just die. We have no idea how many thousands of people in these other countries will die because countries like the US and Europe and other places are buying up all these vaccines. So it's anticipated that countries like South Africa and Argentina and Brazil, they have to wait till 2023 or 2024 to even have a vaccine. What Africa did, so Africa and India, what they did was they went to the World Trade Organization and they submitted a proposal. And the proposal was to waive the patent in order for them to access the U.S. empire, Japan, the U.K., Australia, and Europe, what they did was they were objecting and advocating against the waiver. So the wealthiest countries who have access to purchase this vaccine to save lives in their own countries are advocating against other impoverished companies to have access to it. It's just clearly capitalism. So hoarding it, exploiting these countries as they participated and have no access to it. And now these pharmaceutical countries in America and the US empire are making millions of dollars off of vaccination that could save lives, and anybody who's impoverished will not have access to it. On top of that, there's no infrastructure. You know, they're like, you could take it out. Walgreens, like right now, you can go in New Mexico anyway, and you can register on the DOH website in order to like pre-register to take it. Across this country, there's like literally no plan, no infrastructure in order for people to, in order for 90% of the people in this country to have the vaccine. And because there's no plan, billions of dollars that have been being spent on patents, billions of dollars that have been spent on the vaccine, it's just going to be wasted. It's going to be wasted, and we're going to be in this pandemic even longer because none of this medicine that can save lives is going to be able to be distributed because there's literally no plan at all on how to get the millions of people vaccinated. I think that is all I have for this section. So basically, it's what's going to happen is it's a global vaccine apartheid. That's what's happening, and it's because the cause of this country and other rich countries purchasing up all the vaccination and all the vaccines and not caring, like not having any medical solidarity with other countries that need this medicine too to save lives. One more thing I want to mention is there is efforts around developing an international plan on like stopping pharmaceutical companies for doing this, because this isn't new. This is something that they've done for years and years and years, that they've tested in other impoverished companies, develop a vaccine, make money off of it, and then they have no access to it, and then people die. So even like, for example, with hepatitis C in Brazil, only 1 out of 7 people had access to it. So this isn't anything new. So there's an effort on how, when these tests do happen, because they're going to always continue to do that in impoverished companies, in impoverished countries on how at least up to 20% of the population can have access to the medicine. So there is an effort now to try to address this because this global pandemic is so serious in its repeated history that the U.S. empire continues to do in other wealthy countries.
Thanks, Monica. So yeah, it's a vaccine apartheid is like a really good word because as Monica explained, the U.S. and Europe and Israel have bought up hundreds of millions of doses. Israel is being praised globally for its efficient distribution of the vaccine, but Israel is denying Palestinians access to the vaccine on Palestinian land intentionally. So the population of Israel is proceeding towards full vaccination quite rapidly, but there are millions of Palestinians on the same land who are not getting access to the vaccine. And then of course the United States, as Monica explained, they bought hundreds of millions of doses that are quite likely going to expire in fridges in pharmacies around the country because there is no public health infrastructure to actually give these vaccines to people. And in the meantime, because they bought up hundreds of millions of doses because they had superior wealth, countries in Africa, countries in South America, and countries in Asia are not going to see this vaccine for years, and it's going to wreak havoc and cause many deaths. However, the United States companies are not the only folks working on vaccines. Thank goodness, because holy crap. So Cuba, who is world renowned for their extremely advanced medical system, because they decided after they had the armed struggle of their revolution and they won, they're going to focus on the health of their population instead of profit. And so now they have some of the best doctors and healthcare in the entire world, some of the best, what's it called? Biological science, bioscience, but you know, whatever that is. Like they're very good at producing medicines and vaccines and new healthcare technologies. And so Cuba is actually working on 4 separate COVID vaccines, 4 separate vaccines. The 2 that are the most far along are Soberana 1 and Soberana 2. They function a little bit differently actually than the mRNA vaccines in the United States. They're called conjugate vaccines because they pair a immune boosting protein with a pre-existing vaccine that Cuba already had and use that pre-existing vaccine as a carrier to inject the COVID fighting protein into folks. So it's like a little bit different than the mRNA vaccine, but and they're not being distributed in Cuba right now. They're still going through clinical trials. Even though, so like the US and European produced vaccines were fast tracked because of the urgency of the situation. Cuba, however, has been very, very successful in controlling the spread of COVID-19 on the island. To date, they've only had like a little bit over 100 deaths and a little bit over 1,000 infections for a population of 11 million. So they've been doing fine. And so for them, this vaccine is less of a magic bullet and more of a let's make sure this doesn't happen again. And so they're able to like take their time and test it out and go through the full trial sequence. So Soberana 1 and Soberana 2 are the 2 Cuban vaccines that are closest to being publicly distributed. But there's also Abdala and Mambisa that are 2 additional vaccine candidates that are a little bit newer. And Mambisa specifically is going to be administered in the form of a nasal spray. So not a shot, a nasal spray. And the nasal spray contains a medicine known as interferon alpha 2B, which at the very, very beginning of the pandemic, Cuban doctors discovered was extremely effective at improving outcomes of COVID-19 patients. And so it was subsequently shipped around the world. They sent it to China, they sent it to Italy, they sent it to Europe, or to Spain, to Panama, etc. All over the world, Cuba sent interferon alpha 2B. And then with this vaccine, Mambisa, they have used interferon alpha 2B in a nasal application to prevent folks from getting COVID. So those are the 4, in brief, the 4 different Cuba COVID vaccines that are available. However, even if people in the United States were interested in getting this Cuba vaccine, because as we just explained, the US does not have the public health infrastructure to distribute the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines that they have bought millions of doses of, which means that those vaccines are going to expire without being given to everybody. And we're still going to be in a situation where people need to be vaccinated. And so additional options for vaccine, as well as Cuban doctors, would be extremely useful in that particular situation. But the US government has been attacking the Cuban Revolution for 60 years, continuously. And one of the ways the US government attacks the Cuban Revolution is through the form of an economic blockade. And what that blockade does is it prevents Cuban medical innovations from being used in the United States. So Cuba's COVID vaccines will not be available to US citizens because of the blockade. And it's actually not the only medication like that. Like, for example, Cuba has a diabetes medication that makes it so people's legs don't have to get cut off. My grandma just lost her leg. I assume it was diabetes. It happens to many, many, many African and indigenous families because the healthcare system in this extremely rich capitalist country is a joke. But Cuba has developed a medicine to treat diabetes that prevents the need for amputation. And again, even though many, many, many people are suffering from that in the United States, they cannot access that medication because of the blockade. Additionally, Cuba has said already that they can produce enough of these vaccines to treat their entire population. And then on top of that, they have said that they are willing to make these vaccines freely available to poor countries who are, again, being locked out of access to the Pfizer, Moderna, and now AstraZeneca vaccines. Cuba is saying, y'all can't get those, but we can give you this. However, the blockade limits the amount of vaccines that Cuba can produce because it literally blocks them from accessing the materials they need to manufacture the vaccine. So there's like a hard limit to how much of the vaccines that Cuba can produce internally. Luckily, places like China are willing to work with Cuba to manufacture many, many, many more doses. And Cuba and China in partnership are probably going to save these countries that have been locked out of access to the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine. Like Africa is not going to be able to get Pfizer or Moderna till 2023, 2024. But if Cuba and China are able to produce enough doses, Africa can use that instead. No thanks to the United States. Anyway, so those are the 2 Cuban vaccines that are available. They are not going to be available to US citizens, no matter how effective they are. And I guarantee you those are going to be some damn good vaccines because Cuban medicine is no joke. And we are just not going to be able to see them because of the economic blockade that not only hurts Cuba, but also hurts millions of people in the United States that are having to live in a country that has no functioning public health system. So those are the Cuban vaccines. Back to Monica.
Yeah, I also think about like Cuba has helped over 23 countries with the immune boosting treatment medicine that they have for free. And I reflect on like China's did the DNA for free. And this country has bought enough dosage that those countries that I talked about earlier, like South Africa, Argentina, Brazil, that they could give people like 3-4 different doses. So like that's how many millions of dosages of vaccine is being stored right now in this country. And the greed to then hire 4 more companies to make more medicine that will not be used. It's just, I just can't even like think of the words and the anger that is just boiling in me because it makes no sense that you're hoarding this medicine and not only are people here going to not have access to it because it's not infrastructure, impoverished countries aren't going to have access to it. Like, it's pure genocide. That's what it is. It's just what it is. And so, right now, what we've been seeing is the vaccine is this magic bullet. So magic bullet, take the vaccine, everything's going to be okay. And that's false. That is so false, how Anya Salud talked about. It is so critical that people are still physically distancing, wearing masks, still washing their hands. It's important that we're still practicing all those safety precautions. There's no capacity, no infrastructure. It would take over 7 years to distribute at the rate we're at. We're at 3 million. So only 3 million people have received the vaccine. That's 2% of the population. It take almost 7 years if we're going at the pace that we're going at in order for the vaccine to happen to 90% of the population. The other thing is Biden's elected. So Biden has an opportunity to actually change the plan around the patent. So Biden has that opportunity to do that, change the plan around the patent so other countries can access this vaccine. So we'll see how that goes. And then the other thing is, what we've been seeing is there's this blame thing going. There's this blame thing going on in our communities where it's people's fault. It's the community's fault that the coronavirus is being spread. It's the community's fault that over 337,000 people have died, when actually it's the fault of this, the lack of infrastructure to support people. So so many millions have to work. They have to work. So you can't stay home when you have to pay for your bills. You also don't have access to health care when you don't have a job as well. And so simultaneously, when we're saying it's important to stay home, this country has to be accountable to providing income. There's no reason why they could not give $2,000, $3,000, whatever it takes a month to people who aren't working to have access to income so that they can pay their lights, so that they can't pay their housing, their rent, because people are losing those. So many evictions are happening. 30 million people were at first unemployed, and I think it's like 12 million now. And so if we have to call for both simultaneously. If we're calling for people to stay at home, provide the resources for people to stay home.
Yep, completely agree. So like what the ruling class and political leadership in the United States are doing is exactly what Monica said, like trying to push this vaccine as a magic bullet, trying to say, like, even Joe Biden, he put out his priorities for the first 100 days of administration, right, for the COVID pandemic. And he said, we are going to impose a mask mandate that can only be like spottily enforced, because he literally just does not have the power. But in like some places there will be a mask mandate, in some places it will be strongly suggested. He said that we want to get to 100 million vaccinations. And let me tell you, that is not going to happen. 100 million vaccinations with vaccines that take 2 doses is vaccinations for 50 million people. Again, we are at 3 million people after 3 months. It's not going to happen, but he promised it. And then he also said his last priority for the COVID-19 pandemic in his first 100 days is to get kids back in school. What? Like, what? First of all, these vaccines are only available to people 18 and older, so the kids can't get vaccinated. They can still catch COVID, and they can also still spread it, but they're not getting vaccinated. Also, the distribution of the vaccine is being given to prioritized groups first. So in that case, it's elders and first responders. My understanding is that New Mexico recently decided to start vaccinating teachers, but most other states have not. They're still on elders and first responders, and they haven't actually finished with those groups. So Joe Biden is saying in the first 100 days that he wants kids back in school, and neither the kids or the teachers will be vaccinated. What would possibly be the intent? But like, what is the goal? And the reason why he's saying mask, vaccine, and kids back in school is because he wants you to go back to work. He's already said that a lockdown is off the table, despite the fact that around the world, the only countries that were able to effectively control the spread were the ones that locked down and paid people to stay home. That is what China did. That is what Cuba did. That is what Venezuela did. That is what Vietnam did. Those, the countries that actually were able to control the spread, locked down. They were able to control it without a vaccine. And despite that, the president of the United States, the results were certified, so it's official. The president of the United States has no intention whatsoever of locking down, has no intention whatsoever of freezing your rent, has no intention whatsoever of freezing the bills or giving people national health care. Which means the only reason he's saying mass vaccine and put them kids back in school is so you can get your ass back to work. That's it. And what's going to happen when you get your ass back to work and this vaccine is being distributed at this particular pace? It means that the virus is going to spread out of control, y'all. It's going to spread out of control, vaccine or no vaccine. It's not going to work. There is no vaccine that is effective enough that can control a spread caused by millions of evictions and millions of people being forced back to work and back into school. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But these people in charge are trying to tell you that this is going to work. It's so bad. It's so bad.
Well, I just like mind-boggling. Just make a plan. Like, one, no infrastructure. We know that. You can't change that. Make a plan on how you're going to distribute vaccines. Make a plan. But like, that is scary. We know that young people, 9 to 17, have the highest rate of being a carrier. And we're sending them to school so that they can be a carrier and continue to spread it. That makes no sense at all. The only sense to me that makes is they're strategically planning for a certain percentage of people to die.
Yep.
Why else would you make the plan well, I meant the teachers aren't even a priority in most states. So like, that makes no sense to me. So to me, it's like, it's almost like they want people to die. There's nothing else I could say. There's no other way how to put it. Because this virus spreads so quickly. And if only 3 million have, how long has it been? Has it been a month since it's been out?
2 months, yeah? Or 3 months?
2 months. So it took 2 months to get 3 million people. It's going to take 2 more months. And then they don't even know how long the first dose is going to last. So for me, I'm just like, man, y'all really need to make a plan if you want to have 90% of people vaccinated. There really has to be a plan. If not, I mean, we're not going to be here just a year. We're going to be in the pandemic 2-3 years. That's what the research is saying. We're going to be in this pandemic at least 3 years if it's going at the rate it's going. You have to do a rent freeze. You have to do a stay-at-home order. You have to do masks. You have to provide financial support to people. It's a must. It's the only way to do it. That's how other countries done it. That's what's happening. Except in this country, it's not.
And it would be one thing if they're like, we don't know if it's gonna work. There's not enough evidence. And maybe the lockdown's a bad idea. But there's like literally a year of history of this being the most effective strategy for controlling this virus. Like, that is how all of these countries, long before a vaccine existed, were able to control this while it was spreading out of control in the United States. The United States failed at every step of the way to develop an adequate public health response. And then they put all of their hopes and dreams onto this vaccine that they are now botching the distribution of, while simultaneously denying access to it to poor brown countries. It is so American. It is like the most American shit ever. But the people in charge are not going to do the right thing on their own. Even though Biden campaigned saying that I will listen to the science and shaking his finger at Trump and saying he would do so much better and like giving people all this hope that it will be different, Biden has said decisively, there will be no lockdown. And Biden has said decisively that Americans are not looking for handouts at a point in time where over 6 million households owe thousands of dollars in back rent and are facing eviction when these moratoriums expire, at a time when millions of people have been unemployed for almost a year, at a time when food pantries all around the country have lines like miles long. This man is saying you don't want a handout. What is a handout? They gave trillions of dollars to the airline industry, to the oil industry, to banks, to major corporations to keep them afloat during this pandemic. And you got $1,800 at best. So, no, $1,600. $1,600 at best.
1 million people haven't seen it yet.
Because they sent it to the wrong accounts. You heard that?
What happened? No.
They sent millions of the latest stimulus checks to the wrong fucking account. And they didn't say anything. And so people were like, wait, what? And then H&R Block looked into it. And then H&R Block put out a statement last night being like, the IRS didn't admit it, but they messed this up. and it's gonna be a couple of weeks, y'all. Like the IRS never said anything. People discovered it on their own that they sent the stimulus checks to the wrong accounts.
How do you do that when you just did it in April? How do you like mess that up? Dang, that's sad.
It's ludicrous.
This government is pitiful.
It's really like the word. Have you ever seen that meme where it's like Goofy and like, it's like a Goofy and then like a lady Goofy and he's like in her house and it's all messy and he's like, damn bitch, you live like this? Like that's what it's like. That's what it's like. We're just like, what is this? This is the richest country on earth? What? Anyway, so Joe Biden's not going to do the